You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates. Today is July 10th, 2020. It's Friday. We just got back from the cottage and I'm still finding sand in areas I didn't even know I had. And we're here to talk more about Toronto real estate market. We're having a lot of fun out here. We're #1 on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And what we've been doing, if you're just tracking with us for the first time, welcome to the family. And what we like to do is stay up to date on the latest news, keep up to date on everything going on. And during COVID, there is a lot to keep track of. Many times I can't keep up. So today we're going to have some excellent content for you. You're going to learn some fun stuff. We're going to start off talking about, has pent-up demand led to overconfidence in Toronto's market? And then from there, after we kind of looked at the top article of the day, we're going to jump into this question: are bidding wars on the decline in Toronto? And what does that look like if we were to look back in history? And then another huge content that I could have probably put at the beginning. We're trying to keep track of what's been going on with evictions, and obviously this question about the new Bill 184. You've probably heard about it. You know, everybody protesting outside the mayor's house. Well, what is everybody so afraid of? We're going to actually look at the bill today, not the actual reading of the bill, because, I mean, it's too early to fall asleep in the morning. But we're going to look at some of the highlights of the bill as it's been reviewed by lawyers, and what are some of the key changes so that you're informed as you make a decision on, is this actually a problem, or are we maybe being a little loud for what's been going on? Anyways, I'm so glad we're back now. And you know what I missed the most? It's when you leave home, you realize the things you truly cherish. And I'd say the #1 thing I missed was my water flosser. Oh, yes. And a close second was my air conditioning. Does that make me a hipster or a diva? I don't know. I'm going to go with hipster. You know why? Because I wanted air conditioning before it was cool. We have fun here. I'm glad you guys could join us as we tune in every single day. Try and keep you guys up to date with what's been going on. And we like jokes. But, you know, jokes about air conditioners? Really? Not a fan. So let's get into the top article of the day. It comes out of TorontoStories.com. It's called "The Average Price of a Toronto Home Hit an All-Time High in June." And I love this conversation because, you know, the last few podcasts we've done have been getting everybody caught up. The world, and by the world I mean the GTA, is starting to come with terms that our market is hot. It's doing really well. And we've been kind of pointing to this. We've been pointing to the stats and how this has been evolving for the last couple months, at least the last month. Like, even if a couple months ago, we were a little bit more conservative, but in the last month, we've been very optimistic about our market, despite a lot of the warnings that are still on the table. Well, now everyone has kind of been caught up because the stats came out from TREB. The average house price in Toronto is up to $930,000 plus, which is an all-time high and surpasses the record from 3 years ago back in 2017. The previous record was $920,000, so we actually overshot it by $10,000 before the stricter rules for, as you remember, the mortgages and the foreign home buyer thing cooled our market down. The detached properties were up 14%, semis are up 22%, and the little known fact is condos aren't doing so hot. Even townhomes are kind of boring, but condos specifically are seeing climbing months of inventory, and that's not being reported in any amazing fashion. So keep your eyes on that. And just having noted that, a lot of people are waking up to the fact that, crap, I have a condo. What does this mean for me? And I've got a lot of inquiries trying to help people out and navigate what comes next. And people who are looking to buy condos, what does the timing on that look like? We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So this article, they interview a few people. The TREB president, Lisa Patel, she said this: following the broader movement to reopen the economy in June, we experienced a very positive result in terms of home sales and selling prices. Before the onset of COVID-19, there was a great deal of pent-up demand in the market. This pent-up demand arguably increased further over the past 3 months. So now the news is all of a sudden super optimistic. Right? And the reason that matters, if you think about it from an investment perspective, oftentimes when people are going crazy excited, that kind of adrenaline rush, everyone's flocking to the market, is the time to really be considering, I don't know if this is where I want to be. And vice versa, when everyone's running away from the market, that's the time you really got to start wondering, is this maybe a good buying opportunity? Which is what we just came through. But that former one, the idea that people are now flocking in almost, it's like a bunch of sheep, right? A bunch of sheep to the slaughter here, running quickly to our market at such a peculiar time. Right? We're in a spring market, which of course has a lot of activity, a lot of excitement. And even guys like John Passalis, who, I really value what he has to say. He added, they commented in this article about his Twitter feed, and I wanted to read the entire post because I think it's a very good indication. I'm going to give you kind of my thoughts on everything as well. So he said this: I'm seeing far too much confidence in housing as a result of the strong sales and prices we've been seeing the past 6 weeks. People are misreading the data. This is not a common conversation right now, by the way. This is underground, as us hipsters like to call it. The booming housing market is not proof that even 14% unemployment can't keep Toronto's housing down, which is actually a direct reference to one of the major articles that came out in the last few weeks. This is a short-term demand shock that was caused by the housing market nearly shutting down for 2.5 months. Not unlike the demand shock that hair salons are experiencing today. Thousands of people need a haircut. Hair salons are booked till the end of August. I love the illustration. It does not mean that this level of demand is typical for the hair salon business. It is a demand shock caused by COVID. The same is happening for housing, and sooner rather than later, things will cool down in the housing market too. This is not the quote new normal. Again, very much against what the major media is saying. Now, that said, this article is number one, but his point comes later down the line. The last few days, we've seen extreme highlights of how great everything is. I mean, even John himself has said he expects a strong July, which we're saying here too. But we need to be very careful that you don't see what's happening right now as something that's going to be ongoing, because it's absolutely not the case. As COVID unfolded and emergency orders were enacted, potential buyers stepped back off the sidelines. They'd been waiting, right? And then all of a sudden stage 2 happens and people appear to be feeling more confident about looking and buying properties again. There's a little bit of an illusion happening here. Passalis expects the same thing will happen for Toronto's housing market as more buyers and sellers return to the market. Prices could potentially continue increasing through July. There's a few big things we got to be watching for. Some of the things they name here is the looming deferral cliff, right? The deferral cliff. Mortgage deferrals are coming due. 6 months is almost up. Turn off the taps. Or maybe we'll keep them drizzling. Let's see if CMHC wants to throw more money, and $3 billion isn't enough. Sorry, $100 billion isn't enough. It's crazy. And CERB, right? CERB's coming due. We extended it. Can we keep that going? We've already seen proposals from opposition parties saying this is what we should do to get off it. And we're going to cover another article pointing to very much of the same. People have been waiting for the Toronto housing bubble to burst for years. And nearly 4 full months into the pandemic, this has left much of the world's economy on its knees. It looks like they're going to have to keep waiting. You can laugh about that wherever you are, right? Because, I mean, in some cases, you want to wait a little bit longer. I would tread very carefully, guys. Very carefully. This same voice that's coming to you in Toronto's #1 real estate podcast just months ago was saying, this is a good buying opportunity. Now I'm saying, be careful. This month is very solid for the stats, except, again, condos. But August and September, and depending on this eviction thing, it could happen as early as August, is going to get pretty risky. Condos right now, in my book, are a sell. So my portfolio, if I had condos, which I don't, if I had condos in my portfolio, this would be the time I'd be thinking about selling, which is rough, but it's only going to get rougher. This is the reason. But by early 20, let's not lose sight of condos. Recognize, I think, as the psychology of our market has shown, some things can get oversold. People can miss the news, and there will come a point, and you got to be tuned in when that happens. I'll let you know, when it's actually a good buying opportunity for condos, right? Because people are dumping. Months of our inventory going through the roof. The moment we see stabilized market in the condo space, things start coming back down. The prices have accelerated in the detached and the low-rise segment so much faster than the condos. That flip will happen again. We just need to be on it. But for right now, I put the condos in a sell position. Most of the other stuff I would say, yeah, you're in a buy position, but I'd still be holding it in the long term just in case. Here are things I'd be keeping in mind. Okay. As I've talked to people who have asked me a lot of questions, I would say, think of these things. Okay. First off, seasonal. We're in the spring. Naturally, you're going to see prices come down in the winter. So even if the market did absolutely nothing, even if it was just a regular run-of-the-mill year, you're going to see prices come down. Don't get caught up in the hype, okay? Second thing, we did see back in 2008 a thing called a second crash. I don't know if you guys were here when we talked about that, but we noticed prices skyrocketed. And then what happened right after that was they dropped all the way back down to where they were pre-recession. And it happened very quickly, like relative for real estate. And it continued to kind of tread along, right? You saw that massive drop, even bigger increase, and then a drop back to normal. So if you're jumping in at a point where we're at the top again and it comes back down to quote normal, watch out, right? You got to be in this for the long term. But we're going to be watching mortgage deferrals, CERB, which again, proposals are being put forward, and evictions, which I place 50-50 on, might even be as early as the end of July, beginning of August, that you start to see that happening again. And I was speaking to someone kind of along the same lines about an assignment sale. They're like, I was talking to someone out in Vaughan. I want to buy a condo, doing an assignment sale. What do you think? And I said, well, when's the closing on the assignment? He said, September. I said, well, if it was me, I would hold him over the fire, right? Because give it a month, give it 2 months, hold him later. In fact, it would be ideal if he wasn't closing until December, because he's going to start freaking out. He bought that condo in a hot market, talking double digit increasing prices. And now he's stuck with an assignment sale where he's trying to recuperate any profit and not take any losses in a market where there's overall fear that will begin to take place in the condo segment. So I said, hold on to it, right? Hold him over the fire. Timing is everything. If you're buying, that is. If you're buying and selling, if you're moving, no big deal. But if you're investing, if you're looking at times to get in and get out and move big money at key times in history, we got to be paying attention. All right. We're having some fun here. Bring it back. All right, let's talk a little bit about bidding wars. I saw an article this morning, came out of Global News, and it was, I think, the third article on the list. Not everything is worth reading, but I think this one adds some value because they talk about this idea of bidding wars. So the article is called this: Toronto home sales rising, bidding wars declining amid coronavirus pandemic. So let's hear what they had to say. Much like the weather, the real estate market in Toronto is hot. No AC, hot. It seems not even a global pandemic can hold back home prices. Can't even be stopped by a train. It's like a plug. I gotta get sponsors on this channel. I just plug people for free. Pandemic or not, I don't think anything can burst a bubble in Toronto right now. If you had to guess what industry that person was in that said that, what would you guess? I'll say it again. Pandemic or not, I don't think anything can burst a bubble in Toronto right now. I'm not going to say the name because I feel like I'm building it up too much. That's a realtor. That's a textbook realtor right there. Tonight was supposed to be its offer night, and within 3 days, so she's talking about her clients, we had a great buyer, so people buying bully offers, right? But they were talking about other properties where they're seeing in their area, they had 5 offers. This is very common. I'm seeing this all around too in certain segments. This is where I think this article kind of mixes things up. You group everything together, you miss the point because you're trying to sell a story. The media is so much easier to do things in broad strokes. You don't want to dive segment by segment because, let's face it, it's not so fun. This is the reason why I believe that you've heard news saying, oh, Detached doing this and Semi's doing this and, they're doing so well. And that's the news story. Because if you were trying to mix in there, oh, but condos, not so much, or condos are dragging behind, unless it's a footnote, it's going to confuse your audience, right? Because a lot of people aren't as savvy. They want to know, okay, I want to make sure my house is okay or the market's okay. And you kind of sell a story if you've got two conflicting stories, which is often the case. And we've seen this for years and years now in the condo and the freehold, that kind of galactic residential battle. All right, let's move right along. So then they say they make a poke here, which I think is hilarious. I'm going to read it. Global News gained access to Toronto real estate sales data after the Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal by TREB against a decision by the Federal Competition Bureau in 2018. So they're like, we got access. You and everybody else. Guys, just go on housesigma.com. You can see the sale of your neighbor. It's like some secret, like, oh, I got to go to Global News, got to get that access. So what I did find was interesting was they were kind of talking about this idea of bidding wars, right? And so they said the data shows that while home prices are higher than they've ever been, bidding wars are not happening at the same level as in 2017. This is the pitch, okay? So here's what they got to say. One way to look at bidding wars is to compare the average list price of a home with the average sold price. That's kind of how you do it. A bidding war, you can't really know what's a bidding war. Bidding war, I guess there's really no way to, as I'm thinking it through, there's no way to calculate that. And oftentimes it's, if you see a price goes over asking, it is indicative, or we assume a bidding war. That's kind of how they've done it. So for June 2020, the average list price was effectively equal to the average sold price, suggesting that most homes are not being bid over asking. That's right now, June 2020. For comparison, in March 2017, the average home price was 11% above the average list price. And if I could add to that, homes were selling in less than a month. They were flying off the shelf. It just goes to show you, a matter of 10% can have huge implications when people are panicking. And whether you got 3-4 multiple offers versus 10 multiple offers, does it make a big difference? Some people would argue not really. The idea of a multiple offer is going to drive prices up. But I think this is a little bit of a smoke and mirrors, because a lot of people very recently were pricing their homes for multiple offers. We had like 60% of them were pricing them below the value in order to drive multiple offers. And on a turn of a dime during COVID, they changed their tune and they started pricing them more accurately with the assumed value, which people were trying to catch or figure out at that point anyways. And that number was dropping very quickly. But all this to say, you're going to expect, and they even say in this article, which is why the title is even deceiving, but expect that this month in July, you're going to see bidding wars increasing. You're going to see the average sold relative to the average list price going up. You're going to see more of that. Maybe not like we saw back in 2017. In fact, I'd be hard pressed to say we would see what we saw in 2017, but absolutely you're going to see it increasing because people are starting to wake up to the fact that we're in a hot market. They missed it. Realtors missed it. I think the public and the realtors got caught flat-footed. And the other thing to keep in mind is this depends on segment, right? Because back in 2017, everything was doing pretty good. I mean, even condos, if anything, were doing slower. But of course, we've got you remember, multiple offers were crazy. If you can recall 2017, it was nuts. And since then, condos have outperformed, which is that kind of fluctuation we've seen. But now we see condos on the flip side, they're not really pricing themselves for multiple offers, not really getting the multiple offers. In fact, most of their offers are lowball offers. They're sitting for months at a time. And so it's very different. It's very hard to compare over and over, but I do expect that if you're seeing articles like this, where you're seeing bully offers are down or multiple offers are down, kind of, the market is often slow to respond. You guys are listening to my voice. And if you applied what I say, I mean, I'm not allowed to give advice. I don't know if I'm allowed to give advice. I try to avoid giving advice, but oftentimes if you listen to what I'm doing, you can formulate your own thoughts. But if you're listening here daily, you're a week ahead, at least a week ahead. Like, just watch, give it another few days and you're going to hear a ton about this eviction thing. Okay. Like, you've heard it here. I said this 2 days ago. Just watch. This is in the article. I've sold 12 properties since March, and 4 of them have been in bidding wars, and 8 of them have gone over ask. So as all of us are seeing, now the market is completely robust and it's bursting at the seams, which brings into this question that we saw earlier. Is it oversold? Is the market being overly optimistic? If you follow what I'm saying. You be the judge. Make your investments accordingly. You guys are smart. You got a head and shoulders. Until it comes to discussing evictions as a landlord and tenant, and then apparently nobody's got any heads on their shoulders. We're going to talk about that in a second, but some highlights as well. End in sight for Ontario's residential eviction ban. I just saw another article from Now Toronto. Not a very popular article, but very interesting. And for a refresher, and any of you who missed our last podcast, go back and listen to it. It's a good one. I think every podcast is a good one. But there's a few things that are happening that we need to be paying attention to, that if you put them all together, you'll realize a bit of a trend. Step 1, the eviction of residents from their home pursuant to the eviction orders issued by the Landlord and Tenant Board or writs of possession are suspended until the end of the calendar month of the state of emergency is terminated. So in other words, the month you see a state of emergency is being terminated, the following month, you're allowed to evict. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2, this Tuesday, the government proposed that they should be allowed to continue emergency orders into next year, even after the state of emergency has expired. In other words, we don't want this thing to go on forever, but we want to be able to do what it's doing. So you see how this is put together? Step 3, we got this thing called Bill 184, which kicks tenant out, as many argue, faster. And we'll cover if that's the case or not. We're going to talk about that in a second. So all of these things hand in hand tell me with a July 22nd as our next kind of emergency orders due date, which was less than a 2 year, I don't know if there's anything to this, but they pushed it forward 12 days, not 14 days, which it's in my mind is a little suspicious. And to line up with this legislation, which is now its third reading in the Bill 184. So I put it 50-50 for this month. Just watch. If not, it'll be shortly thereafter. And we're going to talk about Bill 184. But before we do, talk about some of the fun stuff happening as well. Cadillac Fairview. They're turning their mall parking lots into drive-in movie theaters. They're no small name. Have you ever heard of Toronto Eaton Centre or Sherway Gardens? How about Fairview Mall or the shops at Don Mills? They own all these malls and they're hoping to turn into local drive-in movies, which would be pretty fantastic. I saw someone say on one of the tweets underneath is like, well, you can't Netflix and chill at a drive-in. Guys, people are looking for any reason to get out of their house with kids. I'm telling you, as someone with children, you're looking for a reason to get out, okay? That's a great idea. And they're desperate because let's face it, retail is sucking right now. None of those tenants are paying their rent. I also saw an article that came out of the Globe and Mail I thought was really cool. And they discuss the difference between CERB and the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy. These two programs. One, the CERB pays you $2,000 a month and is a disincentive, as the Globe and Mail calls it, to enter the workforce. Because they say that it's equivalent to the average hourly wage of just less than $15 for an average 33-hour work week, well above the minimum wage in most Canadian jurisdictions. So in other words, people don't want to go to work. And so CERB is getting rolled off. This is why I think CERB is going to end very quickly. Whereas what do you call this? The Qs? It's like Syracuse when I drove into New York. It's Syracuse. What do you call this? CEWS? Qs? The CEWS. Right? The wage subsidy. They're saying it's key to helping businesses deal with the high cost of running. And a lot of people haven't used it. It's where the employers can cover 75% of employees' wages. And then it's topped up at $847 per employee. But they're saying it's been underutilized. But the reason is because people haven't reopened. And as they reopen, they'll use it. And they're saying we need to move workers off the CERB and back into the queues. Put them in the queues. Okay, guys, we're going to jump into Bill 184. This is a great lesson for me, too, because I honestly didn't really care for the Bill 184. I'm like, pass it, and then we'll look at it. But it's becoming such a loud voice. They're standing outside the mayor's house protesting. It's even got the mayor, I find it ironic, within a day or two after saying, you know what, I disagree with the legislation. It's like, yeah, of course you do, because your neighbors hate you right now. They're standing outside your condo. Conflict of interest much. So this thing, Bill 184, this is going to be jammed with info, but you're going to learn a lot. Trust me, right here. Here we go. It's called the Protecting Tenants and Strengthening Community Housing Act. It's now in its third reading as of Monday, June 6th, which is the last step before it becomes law. So we're pretty close. But why the alarms, the article says, right? When there are new rules in the bill, did you know this? Increasing fines to landlords for bad behavior. So this is not a one-sided bill. It would sound like it's one-sided if you listen to the loudest voice in the room, but it's really not. And you're going to hear both sides here. The bill is bad for tenants, advocates say. Mainly, here's the big reason, because it will make it easier to evict them. You've probably heard that, especially now that many people are in worse financial shape. And they say this, it improves the situation for tenants from landlords who don't play by the rules. That was from the CEO of the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario. I think housing providers as a title is hilarious. I think you're a landlord. People don't like the name. Screw them. We're not landlords. When we're talking to the guys at Rain, that's what they call it. They call it housing providers. I get the nobleness to it, but I'm not a noble person. I'm quite trashy. I'm a little hipster sometimes. And some people are like, diva. The changes on balance are either benign or beneficial to tenants. So there's one thing in here that we need to point out. A big part of this is this thing called Section 78. Sounds like a Star Wars spaceship. We're entering Section 78. And sometimes, so what it is, so they insert it's a repayment plan, which allows the eviction orders to go ahead without notice to the tenant if the tenant does not follow the repayment plan. So usually what happens at the LTB, the Landlord Tenant Board, is they add this to Section 78 on top of their order, where you can kind of repay the thing. And if they don't if they can go ahead and kick them out without notice if they're not making their payment. And they explain now that Bill 184, it actually allows the rent repayment plans that are being drawn up outside the board, is being drawn up between the landlord and the tenant, which is actually smart from an efficiency perspective because the LTB was already bogged down. They're saying you guys deal with it, and according to Bill 184, you can have the Section 78 drawn up as part of that agreement, which is, again, allows you to evict them without notice to the tenant if they don't follow the repayment plan. So it puts a lot of weight and emphasis on the repayment plan or you can get kicked out. Hopefully that makes sense. Any agreement made between landlord and tenants outside the board would need to be sent to the LTB for review. This is part of this too. They need to approve it. And if the LTB does not approve the agreement, then the parties go to a hearing. So even though you guys are discussing it, it's not like it doesn't cross the LTB's desk. It does. So what's the difference between an agreement being done at the board versus between landlords and tenants? So then you get these opposing views. It seems reasonable that the landlords and tenants should be able to come up with some kind of agreement. This is what the landlords are saying. If they can't, the landlord-tenant board is still the final arbiter. The arbiter? I guess that's how you say it, arbitration. Right? But then tenant advocates, this is the louder voice, says the demographic of tenants are disproportionately represented by the most marginalized, including immigrants, single parents, students, and disabled people. So tenant advocates in many ways are saying they're not smart enough to understand the rules. They say 90% of tenants don't know they have the ability to raise issues. This is the argument. If you're going to stand on the side, you have to acknowledge the fact that tenants aren't smart enough, because this is where this becomes a problem, because you're head to head. They're saying that if there was a dispute, right, at the board, the tenants, they have access to things like resources, right, legal advice, help with budgeting and understanding what they can afford and consequences of not sticking to the agreement, as well as a trained mediator. These are things you lose by putting them face to face. And of course, oftentimes you're going to be with a large property management company that knows what they're doing. So there's some there's nothing wrong with saying you're not as smart as the other guy at the table. But that is by default the argument that's being made when you're saying that it streamlines the process to kick people out. There are people who explain provisions in the agreement so the tenant understands what they are signing. That's in a normal case, but in this case, they don't. And this, quote, over-the-counter eviction notice that we see in this Section 78 means if you don't follow the plan, you agreed with the landlord that you can get kicked out without notice. This does not mean they will be immediately evicted. Landlord spokespersons say an application for eviction still has to be signed off, again, by the board. Really strange. That's the heavy stuff, okay? That's the Section 78. That's the heavy stuff. Well, there's some other interesting things going on too, this idea of rent evictions, because it's not all fine and dandy for just the tenants, or for just the landlords, sorry. It would seem that way. It would seem it's like it's all in favor of the landlords. But what is the big problem right now for landlords? The big problem is the lack of payment of rent. So that's the number one issue. But there's more things that have happened. This idea of rent evictions, kicking them out in order to renovate the place, or kicking them out so that you can move your family in. And there's been no way of tracking that. So this allows better protection for the tenant for bad behavior. It allows the landlord and tenant board to consider past records to determine whether the landlord was acting in bad faith. It increases the fines to $25,000 to $50,000 for an individual, and from $100 to $250 for a corporation. So if you're deciding, should I rent my property as a personal or a corporation? Well, depends if you're going to follow the rules, because if not, I would be opening it as an individual. And they require landlords to compensate tenants for increased rent and out-of-pocket expenses after the eviction if it was found to be in bad faith. So there's a lot of wrist slapping that's going to happen to these landlords. And when there's landlords with big pockets, there needs to be quite hefty fines. So, and a lot of people are saying, oh, they'll kick them out and replace them with someone else. But here's the thing. Rents are declining and staying flat. So it's actually, hopefully that will address a lot of those issues. And they say, however, what happens when the eviction ban is lifted, and as is now expected at the end of July after the province lifted the state of emergency? That was one little sentence near the bottom of this article, guys. Let me read that again. Those representing landlords say there's still an eviction freeze in place, right? So, however, what happens when the eviction ban is lifted, as is now expected at the end of July after the province lifts the state of emergency? So there you go. There you go. Globe and Mail agrees with me. They're not pushing it as a major story, but it should be, right? It should be. It should be bigger news. And so it will become bigger news as time progresses in the media. There you go. And they're saying 21% of the 630 tenants in Toronto are being threatened with evictions for non-payment of rent. Of course, give me my money. Oh, my money. Go live at a cottage. We have no doubt some rent will be forgiven by landlords, he says, but there may be a need for government assistance. I'm going to put my bets on government intervention or government assistance. Here's why I say that. The other provinces that have recently done it out in the Atlantic provinces, they are now their hands being forced where they have to help because there's such a large amount of debt, quote unquote debt, being owed to these landlords. And in a province like Ontario where there was no support along the way, where are you guys? Like, how are you helping us? You're gonna remove the eviction ban and then you're gonna leave everyone out on the streets and you're gonna leave landlords high and dry. I anticipate some heavy government assistance, which will hopefully curb it and keep people in their house. That's what we want, really. Allowing landlords to seek compensation for costs like rental arrears or damage to a rental unit. This is another thing that's been adding. Also, another thing that was added in there. So in the past, if you damage my house, I can't do anything. Now I can. Under Bill 184, tenants have been constrained to a 1 year to file. So they only got 1 year to file for illegal rent increases. So they need to stay on it, which obviously has tenants in the tizzy. The government could have fixed the delays at the board by hiring more adjudicators and mediators. That's easily said. Not so easily done. The LTB has been packed. So these are some of the big things coming to Bill 184. So when we talk about Bill 184, I'm not going to cover all these things again, but hopefully, having listened to this podcast, now you understand the major things. It is crazy, the news, trying to keep up with everything. I can't keep up with the craziness of the market across the news these days. I guess it's true. The best place to drown a hipster is in the mainstream. All right, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll see you next time. Happy flossing, folks. Take care and keep it real.